I'll just give you a very quick flavour of what we do, and then what I'm going to talk about, I'm just going to talk about our footprint and how we got there. Not big into solutions, but just talk about the trends in our greenhouse gas emissions and how we've got to where we are now. So the Ecology Foundation originally has set up probably more worthy aspirations around a resourceful business and doing being sponsored to do research, etc. Doing CSR, we were the first to met Colin Boland from on board Panola. We were doing bicycle to work schemes even before the Finance Act came in on that. We did green weeks for companies, etc. That certainly moved on. Sponsorship, as people will know, has dried up quite significantly. So people say, well, what am I going to get for my money? So we're working with companies on carbon footprinting, carbon strategies, etc. We do some work in the policy area. Irish Continental Group, shipping will become part of the emissions trading system, and we do work for them in telling them how that will affect their business. We've moved on to do some business modelling, and we started doing in the last few months doing some of our own projects, which I'll quickly talk about, all within the low carbon sphere. So this is a flavour of some of the companies that we've had who have given us and paid for work from us. We're very proud. We are a consultant to Carbon Trust, albeit it was a small bit of work, but it's always nice to have the Carbon Trust there. But it gives you an indication with Vodafone. We delivered a lecture series for Siemens, and we did them here at Bolton Street. We're currently doing Board of Mona's footprint, etc. So a good range of companies that have engaged us to do various pieces of work. So still very much an appetite out there in corporate Ireland for this type of work. What's happening? What areas can I get into? How will this affect me in the future? Obviously, I would think the continued appetite would be contingent on Copenhagen, and unfortunately, the press coming out this week doesn't look as if there's going to be an all singing, dancing agreement there. So it may recede the carbon agenda back on companies' strategic agendas. I just mentioned we were dabbling in a number of green tech areas very quickly. We're evaluating not a spirit of Ireland, but there's a number of pumped hydro storage potential sites being touted around the southwest of Ireland. We've done some research with Borgosh on high altitude wind energy, which I think is going to form part of the whole spectrum of delivering renewable. Very excited about it for a number of reasons. Also, we have kind of looking further afield, we have a small retainer from Gazprom to look at concentrated solar power, trying to develop a carbon accounts package where people can run off their SAP system, a P&L. A bit much, is it? Okay, sorry. Run their P&L with their carbon figures on it. Like a lot of people, what will this electric car infrastructure do? So a leading fuel distributor has asked us to say, well, what would our filling station of the future look like, and how can we get a slice of that? Even it may be a vanity project at this point, etc. And then lastly, working with Vodafone in Newbury on creating a finance model for sustainable community power production. So at the moment, using the base station network to provide telecom to remote communities, but also provide as an energy source. So, all I have to say, very early stage, probably under-financed at this point, and some of them, but all very exciting on that. So that gives you an idea of what we do. I'd like to talk now in terms of carbon, and just going back, I suppose, a very basic primer. We all know the carbon cycle, a series of fluxes in and out of solution, and that nature's Gaian model had roughly an equilibrium between plants growing and decaying, an equilibrium of carbon going in and out of the atmosphere, and likewise the probably under-researched role that the solutions play in buffering CO2. And so this whole series of repositories of carbon under the earth, in the sea, in the atmosphere. And I suppose what nature didn't factor in its P&L were these that Homo sapiens would crack this way of delivering these into the atmosphere at a rate, at a huge rate, which was never in nature's equilibrium study, and very quickly on that. And And I suppose this is what's given rise to this idea of trying to understand a carbon footprint, that we have seen. You've seen the model over 2,000 years, the three main greenhouse gases, and every greenhouse gas gets rolled up into its CO2 equivalent. So I'm going to go talk about carbon in its broadest sense here. But we've obviously seen the CO2 parts per million roughly dabble along through on that, and soaring as we are, probably at about 388, 390 parts per million at the moment. And likewise, we've seen through anthropogenic activities around industrial husbandry of animals, fertilization of farmland, etc., that the similar rise in greenhouse gases at a parts per billion level of CH4 and nitrous oxide on that. So these are the things which I suppose wasn't in nature's master plan that we now have to contend with and start trying to pull those down at an atmospheric level. We can also see a cumulative gigatons of CO2 as we go through from the 1850s and the kick-off, and then we see this ramping up to where we are today. So this contained amount of atmospheric CO2 emissions that we have, 25 gigatons. So that's I think we all know, that's our primer, that's where we know we are. So I'm not going to go, obviously the obvious connection with this to climate change is well known, and so hence starting this pathway to decarbonise, to reduce and ultimately get this zero carbon, to allow, I suppose, nature catch up and those molecules of CO2 eventually become decommissioned in the atmosphere. So let's look at Ireland's scenario. This has effectively been measured since 1990 across a number of categories, which the colour bars show, about 6 major categories. I'm just going to flick onto that and then flick back to this. So if you can, in your own head, roughly associate a quarter with agriculture, maybe a bit less with transport. We say a quarter with transport, energy production probably a quarter, and then residential and industrial commercial with a quarter. So that's the way the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, measured it. So 4 main sectors. But if we go back to 1990, I suppose that the overarching thing is, if we look at this 50 to 55 million tonnes that we were kicking off, and then obviously implicitly connected with the surge in economic growth, where we are compounding economic growth of 8% per annum. We saw it kick off in over the last 10 years and ultimately hit around 70 million tonnes. So what's 70 million tonnes? One way, I suppose, of representing it, the gross numbers are always then attributed down to the population level. So we have 70 million tonnes, 4.1 million people. And I suppose that gives us our overall emissions. So this is going to be hard to see, but if you could notionally take that as your 1 tonne of carbon. In Malawi, the annual emissions per person is 0.7.